Hello and welcome to this Well of Knowledge session on time management basics. To start off, what is time management? The overall aim of time management is to maximize the time you spend on important things, and the key word being important. And there are two broad ways you can do this. First one is just get more time. Now, without fundamentally breaking the laws of physics or changing the nature of space-time, the only way you can achieve this is by working through lunch, working longer hours, into evenings and weekends, which we know is not good for us. It's not good for our health, it increases stress, increases health complications, and studies have shown there's a higher chance of cardiovascular issues. It leads to unhealthy coping mechanisms such as drinking and overeating. It can damage relationships, etc., etc. So we know we don't want to choose this. It's also not very efficient. Other studies have shown for each hour you work over 40 hours a week, you become less and less productive. So you end up chasing your tail, but another hour won't get everything done because you're less effective at doing everything. Also, if you regularly overwork, you're more likely to make mistakes. So any work you do, you'll have to revisit and redo at a later date. So this isn't a realistic option any of us would choose, but unfortunately, this is one of the defaults. If we don't make any active choices, we end up doing this. The other way is to reduce the time you spend on what's unimportant. So really, the key thing about time management is maximizing the importance and minimizing the unimportant. So let's take a look at you in your average working day, week, month, year. In any given time period, there'll be a certain amount of work that you're able to do, a certain level of outputs that you're able to finish off, a certain number of tasks you can remove from the list. At the other end of the equation, you have all the things you need to do that are coming in. Now, if what's coming in is the same size as what's going out, that's fine, you'll be able to get everything done. You don't have any extra capacity to deal with any emergencies, say a deadline suddenly gets brought forward or a colleague is off ill, you'd probably rather the number of things coming in are a lot smaller. So you would have the capacity to deal with emergencies as they occur. However, what you most likely face is that the number of items coming in are a lot larger than what you're able to output. And this is where you need some tips on time management. If you find yourself in this situation, the first thing to recognize is that if incoming is greater than outgoing, you won't get it all done. And the first thing is to recognize when you're in this situation and recognize that all the things on your list simply won't get done. So let's go back to this illustration. One option you could have of dealing with this massive load of things coming in is to say yes and then just not do it. Anyone think that's a good idea? Nope. We know this is not a good idea, but this is, again, one of the defaults and isn't really a realistic option. So we'll remove that from the list. But what tends to happen is if you do say yes to everything, you will end up something will get dropped, you just haven't chosen what it is. So the first thing to do, the first of the useful tips, of which there are 5, is to just say no. Now remember, saying no is not saying no to a person, it's saying no to a particular task. And when you look at the tasks you're dealing with, if one of them is not important, don't do it. If something is going to get dropped off the list, if there's something you're not able to do, you're better off choosing the unimportant ones and reconciling yourself to the fact you're not going to do them. It's also worth remembering, if you say yes to everything, by default, you are saying no to something else, which leads you into the defaults of saying yes and then not doing it. So the first thing when looking at a big list is have a look at anything you can remove from the list. Fortunately, not always possible, so that brings you to the next option, which is to negotiate. When you're given something to do, or if someone asks you to do something, it's very useful to start asking questions. Just ask, how important is it? How urgent is it? What priority does this have over other things? Putting it the other way around, if you ask someone to do something, particularly if you're a manager, and someone starts asking these questions, it's worth bearing in mind that these questions are aiming to slot this task in with everything else. These questions are aiming to find out what are the really, really important things. These questions aren't intended to be a way of getting out of doing something. So it is worth remembering it's always a negotiation. When you're asked to do something, when you're asking someone to do something, there should be a bit of negotiation to make sure that the high priority things do in fact get done. It's also worth remembering that if everything is important, then nothing's important. The whole nature of things being important is that, by definition, there is something that isn't as important. So it's worth finding out where they fit into an order so you can decide which things to concentrate your efforts on. Negotiate is also useful if you find no quite challenging. Start with negotiate, because if you start with negotiate and you say how important is it and the response is, well, not really, well, that gives you your answer. You should concentrate on something else before getting onto this task. So let's say you've attempted to say no to some things, you've attempted to negotiate with other things. It's now something that's on your plate you need to deal with. The next option is to pass it on or to delegate. Now, it's worth remembering, delegation isn't just a manager delegating to someone junior. You can delegate sideways. You can ask a colleague for help or for a favour. Or you could even delegate up to your manager. If you've gone through negotiating and asking how important this is, and this thing is really, really important, you can then say to your manager, well, I don't have enough time to do this other thing that's also important. Can you assist me? Can you do a part of it? Can you get someone else to do it? And if you are a manager and you are delegating to people, it's always worth remembering when you are delegating, you should specify what needs doing, not how it needs to be done. If you specify how it needs to be done, you end up micromanaging. It's worth making time available to check in with people and offer support. And the big thing is, don't make your problem their problem. If your problem is your to-do list is impossible, and you resolve that by cutting it in half and giving half of that to someone else, you've just made their to-do list impossible. And if you're a manager, you are responsible for everything you're doing as well as that of your team. So try not to fix your own problem by passing on to someone else. And something for the perfectionists out there, I'm one myself, if you ask someone for help or ask someone else to do something, it's worth remembering other people can probably do it as well as you can. I often find it hard to delegate and pass something on because I think, well, no one can do it as well as me. Most of the time, people can. So you should be able to pass things on to someone else. Speaking of perfectionism, that brings us to the fourth option. You could just do it less well. This is another one of the defaults. If you take on too many things and you avoid working too many hours and you avoid saying yes to things and not doing them, you end up doing everything less well. Instead, ask yourself, does everything need to be 100%? Does every single task on your list need to be absolutely perfect? And is your version of 100% the same as everyone else's? You may think you're doing 100% and someone else will look and say, well, that's actually 120. You've encased it in gold and put a diamond on top. If you didn't do that extra 20%, would anybody else notice? And if everything doesn't have to be 100%, you should then save your efforts to concentrate on the things that do have to be precise. Work out which things really do need to be absolutely perfect and spend your time on those. And other things that don't need to be as good, they just need to get done. Remember, done is better than perfect. If you can't do everything perfectly, just make sure you get everything done and concentrate your efforts on the things that do need to be perfect. So that brings us on to the final option of the 5, efficiency. So when you're going through your tasks, particularly if you have tasks that you regularly do, it's worth asking, are you doing it in the best way? And do you have the right tools available? Are you doing something efficiently? Is there anything that you could batch together and automate? Email is a good example. We're all used to getting the little notification that pops up at the corner of the screen for a new email. Is it worth you looking at that every time an email comes in? Or are you better off saying, well, I'll concentrate on one task for an hour, and I'll check my emails for 10 minutes afterwards. One of the dangers of task switching is as soon as your brain switches to something else, it takes you quite a lot of mental capacity to switch back to what you were doing. You return back to your original task and you can't quite remember where you'd left it, where you were, you have to revisit everything. It's much more efficient to concentrate on that task and then batch all your new emails and deal with them in one hit, for example. It's also worth remembering if there is anything that can be automated, or if there's a process that would be made easier if someone else did something slightly differently, or if you're passing information on to someone and you find out that you could do it slightly differently and not impact what they're doing, it's worth remembering that time spent improving things now can have huge payoffs later. If you have a task that takes you 5 minutes every day, and it would take you 2 hours to build a complicated spreadsheet that would make it easier, it's worth doing those 2 hours and then only spending 1 minute every day. Because every time you use the spreadsheet, you're gaining extra time. So it can be worth focusing on making something more efficient and getting that paid back over time. So essentially, that's time management. It's all about maximizing the importance, minimizing the unimportant. The key thing to start is recognizing when you won't get it all done. And if you're in that situation, making active choices and avoiding the defaults of working longer hours, saying you'll do it all and not, or doing everything less well. And you can achieve this using these 5 techniques. Saying no to something, if it's not important, don't do it. You can negotiate and ask questions to find out what priority level this item is and how it relates to other things. You can pass it on, delegate to someone else, or ask for help with what you're doing. You can do it less well, remembering that done is better than perfect. It doesn't all need to be 100%. And you can introduce efficiency. Time spent on improving something today will have huge payoff later on. So that's it for this session. Thank you very much for taking the time. We will be sending out another feedback survey. So if you could take the time to fill that in, it's really helpful to let us know how we're doing. We're also taking suggestions for what you'd like to see in future Well of Knowledge sessions. So do drop me an email if you have any ideas. In the next session, we'll be continuing the theme of time management. We'll be looking at Microsoft My Planner to help you categorize and prioritize the tasks.